Hey, what's up, you guys? Bloody Jacob here to bring you my movie review of Logan. Logan, of course, came out back on the 3rd, and I seen it a few nights ago, but I sort of want to give it sort of time in my mind to sort of stew or simmer, let my thoughts settle so I could give the best review I could, or at least the best, rant or rambling I could. And, before I say what I thought about the movie, I really grew up with Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. He's been playing the role for 17 years. I was born in 1996. I'm 20 years old, 21 in a few months. So I pretty much literally grew up with Wolverine, Hugh Jackman's especially. I remember how much I liked the early X-Men movies. I have all of them. I even have a special collection of the first 3. So this is a pretty big, movie for me. It's like saying goodbye to a part of my childhood in a way. And overall, I really, really liked this movie. Loved it even. I thought it was a great send-off for Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. And not only is it one of the best comic book movies I've ever seen, but it's also just a really good movie, It's not a very, comic book movie, if you know what I mean by that. Of course, it's rated R. That was like one of the main selling points for it. But whether it was rated R or not, it still would have been a good movie. Even if it was PG-13, I think the story still would have been really sound. We still really would have gotten that, emotional payoff at the end. But let's talk about the fact that it was rated R. Get that out of the way. Of course, it probably got the rated R approval because of Deadpool's success. And Deadpool I liked. I didn't love it like a lot of other people do. I thought it was alright. It was kind of weak when it came to the story. But Deadpool is pretty much exactly how he is in the comics. But I think this is definitely the best rated R comic book movie ever, Logan here. Because it has like little bits of humor, but dramatically and emotionally, it's really, really well done. People are comparing it to like DC's The Dark Knight and such. And I can definitely see it. I can definitely see it being sort of the Dark Knight of Marvel films so far. In ways, I like it even more than some of those Dark Knight films. And Batman is my favorite, superhero, superhero ever. Kevin Conroy's Batman anyway. But I really did like the Dark Knight movies. This isn't really a comparison video, though. So yeah, as someone that grew up with these X-Men movies, grew up with Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, I think this is an excellent send-off for him. I've heard mostly nothing but good things people have said about this movie. There's like some here and there that, didn't like it for whatever the reason, but for me personally, it all worked for me for the most part. Is it the best X-Men film? That's hard to say in a way because, there's different types of stories that were done. You have your Logans, but then you have your, the original X-Men films, which aren't really, the same, playing field, really. They're like, different types of stuff. But I will say this is probably the most well-made movie and the most well-acted movie of the franchise, I'll say that. And it definitely blows all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies out of the water, sorry. Which I'm happy about, it should have. So yeah, the premise is fairly simple. Of course, this takes place in some kind of distant future. It's been debated whether this is like a complete alternate reality like the Old Man Logan story is in the comics, or if it exists in the same continuity as the other X-Men movies. And I've been thinking of it as being that. I've been thinking of it as, canon with the X-Men films. Because this is the final film, it's not like we're going to get another movie with Hugh Jackman's Wolverine to see what really happened. I'm thinking of this as what really happened. That's what I'm going with anyway. And it's not quite as, over the top as the comics are, so it feels a little bit more like this could be the reality they end up in. But of course, it kind of gets a little bit muddled, with the Days of Future Past thing, then back to the, different things like that. But I think of it as, existing along with everything else. For me, anyway, that's how it works. But yet, in the distant future, there's some kind of incident that took place. Professor Xavier, of course, played for the final time by Patrick Stewart. He has pretty severe mental issues. I can't remember the exact right term for them. But it's caused him to have these seizures and sort of attacks, and it caused him to sort of, his psychic ability is incredibly powerful. So at some point, a lot of people, including most of the X-Men, were killed in one of these, sort of like attacks that he had. Which is very dark, very grim way to end it, and some people are probably upset by that, but I thought it was sort of realistic. Realistic for them in a way, maybe. I know at one point they're actually gonna have that scene filmed and then have that open the movie, but they made a choice, not to include that. Instead, we get it sort of subtly hinted at or implied. We get little bits of it here and there, like we hear over the radio, but Wolverine turns it off before they say anything about the X-Men directly. And Professor Xavier makes a couple references to doing these very bad things. But that's basically what happened, and it's really like a sort of a jolting to think about all that happening. And Wolverine, he manages to survive, possibly because of his healing factor, and he's able to sustain it longer in order to inject Professor X, to put him back down. And so Wolverine and Professor X have been traveling together for a while. It's sort of like a post-apocalyptic type of thing, not quite as extreme as the comics are, but sort of in that desert type of setting, which I like. And eventually they encounter this girl named Laura, or who really is like X-23 from the comics. And of course, spoilers. She turns out to be very much connected to Logan. She's not like his daughter directly, but she has the same genetic code. She's essentially somewhat of a clone of Wolverine. So that was a nice tie-in. And we also have X-24 a little bit later into the movie, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So Professor X sort of pushes Logan to keep her safe because he senses like something special about her, and you get sort of that Professor X, the way he used to act when he starts talking about her. And of course, there's a bunch of people trying to track her down, as well as Professor X. One of them is played by where's his name? Boyd Holbrook. He's a leader of this group called the Reavers. He's one of their other sort of failed experiment type of things, really, they're trying to improve on. He did alright, I guess. I know he's going to be in the new Predator movie. That's like the one like slight weakness with this movie, is that the villains aren't very interesting like at all. But they're not nearly as bad as like your typical MCU villains. They don't have like any destroy the whole world plot or anything, or any like vague threat like that, so there's that anyway. And this movie was never meant to be about the villains anyway. It's more, that in me is sort of like time and sort of Wolverine, his powers, his regenerative abilities are really going down. He's starting to have scars left on all over his body. He's not as energetic as he once was because of that. Essentially the adamantium in him is poisoning him, and that's sort of like the threat. That's sort of the antagonist in the movie. So I didn't really have a problem with the villains not being really anything to talk about, because that wasn't the point. So what we get is sort of like we get a road trip in a way, and a lot of bonding between Logan and Laura X-23, which I think really worked really well. Dafne Keen, she played Laura. I thought she did a really, really nice job, actually. She comes off like a mute at first, and she finally starts talking. Pisses Wolverine off. But they end up having really good chemistry together in some very touching scenes near the end of the movie. One other thing I wish would have happened in the movie, though, is the return of like Liev Schreiber's Sabretooth. I know at one point they're going to include him and have Wolverine go to him for help or something. That tieback would have just bumped up maybe even a little bit more for me. I don't know why they didn't include Sabretooth in this movie. It would have made sense, it would have worked, but other than that, I really loved every bit of it. Even stop at this farm, meet this sort of a morally correct family, and Patrick Stewart, Professor X, is killed off. This X-24 clone kills him, impales him when he's laying in bed. Before that, though, we get a beautifully acted scene by Patrick Stewart, just saying how the joy he felt this night with Laura, Logan and the family is something he hasn't felt in a very long time. So it's good that he got to die, thinking of that, really. But last shock, he might have thought it was actually Wolverine doing that to him, because he didn't really get like a minute to process it or anything. When Logan finds him, he tries to tell him it wasn't me, Charles, it wasn't me. It's, great acting. And that Wolverine clone, X-24, he's not like a compelling villain, but he really worked, with the mood of the movie, I thought, with the tone of it all. And when he kills Professor X, it really, shifted. Not that there's like a jolt in tones or anything, but it really made the movie even more grim, and I had this like really intense feeling when that happened, after all that. And the fights between X-24 and Wolverine in this movie are brutal. I talked about the R rating. We mostly get like a lot of slashes and stabs, we see blood, but it's not like overdone. It's not the point of the movie. Like, we don't see guts, spilled out, then like the camera zooming in on it or something. It's there. It's appropriate for a Wolverine story. It's what Wolverine would be like if he existed. But at the same time, the violence isn't the point. So I appreciated that. We do get some cool, like, head kills and stuff, though, but so yeah, I love the X-24 fights in the movie, especially the final one was especially brutal. Just with the stabbings, it was really, you could really feel it. And eventually, Wolverine sort of brushes it off. He's trying not to feel anything, but eventually he does develop a connection to Laura, and it's sort of like a father-daughter thing. People have been talking about The Last of Us, comparing it to that. And it really does end up working quite a bit. Like I said, I liked Laura. She ends up having like the same sort of savagery and animalistic spirit as Logan has, and I think she portrays that pretty well. It was like a worry if she could make that believable, but she does. Her snarls and everything else. She really worked. I would love to see her in another movie. I would rather have them continue the X-23 story way before recasting Wolverine, but you know how it goes. And the ending. Before we talk about the ending, there's also this character named Caliban who Xavier and Wolverine were holding up with. I know he's a character from the comics. In the movie, he was played by Stephen Merchant. He was alright. I felt like he was a little bit tacked on. I didn't think the movie really needed him, but he was alright. I feel like they could have had that character be anyone in the movie, and it would have worked the same way. But, it wasn't necessarily a weakness. He was sort of there, I guess. But yeah, let's talk about that ending. Eventually, they find these other projects that were worked on similar to, X-23, and Wolverine tries to take care of all the kids. Eventually, the X-24 clone, and the others track him down. And Wolverine, he's able to take this medicine that temporarily gives him all this energy back, and we see that old, spirit of Wolverine come out. He just, slashes guys left and right down through the forest as he's trying to catch up to the kids to save them. And then we get that final brutal fight between him and X-24, which is just, really, really hard to watch at times, just to see Wolverine get stabbed and sort of destroyed like that over and over. Very brutal, because the medicine wears down by the time he gets to the clone, unfortunately. And he ends up getting impaled on this tree, and Laura is able to use this adamantium bullet to supposedly kill X-24, and then she sort of sits with Wolverine as he eventually dies, which is very, very sad to see. It was something you sort of expected going into this type of story, though, but I'll admit, I was holding back tears. I was going to cry, but I was holding back because, public setting, so I was trying to hold it in a little bit more. But if I, let go, at all, I probably would have cried. So it worked for me, and before Wolverine actually dies, we get this really nice dialogue again. Really great acting from Hugh Jackman. Best performance I've ever seen him give. He's always been really entertaining as Wolverine, no matter how good the X-Men movie was. But this is by far his best performance. And he says things like, "So this is what it feels like." Just to feel that sort of bond and connection, things like that. And Laura even calls him Dad and Daddy and stuff like that. And eventually he is buried, and then she turns the cross over to an X, which is nice. So really great ending, really fitting ending. and it, it really worked for me. I thought it was appropriate way to close it off. I couldn't have seen it really working any better than it did in the end. There were some weaknesses with the movie, like very minor things, like I said, the villains, but they weren't the point, so it's not that big of a deal, as I explained. It did feel a little bit long. The running time is, let's see, a little over 2 hours. It did feel a bit long, but it's all completely worth it. And yeah, there's really not many other problems I have with this movie, really. There's a couple of slow bits, but it's not meant to be like this big action-y, comic book film either, and I really appreciated how they went about it all. But yeah, so overall, I absolutely love Logan. It is the best X-Men movie of all time. It just depends on what mood you're in for, what kind of story you're in the mood for. But it is probably the most well-done story they've ever done, and it, like I said, blows all the MCU movies out of the water. Would have been nice to see Hugh Jackman with the Avengers, but this is a great final movie. I loved it, and I'd rate it an A. Yeah, a solid A. It was that good. The only thing keeping it from an A+ is just like those little minor things I talked about. Some of the characters like Caliban and such, but overall just a great experience. Everything you would really want it to be. It really worked for me anyway. So I know you guys thought about Logan, and yeah, if there's anything else about the movie you want to talk about, feel free to. And yeah, so I'll catch you guys next time. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, like, subscribe. I'll see you guys later. Peace.